Hello, I'm Matteo, the Chief Mobile Opinionist here at Tech Travel Geeks, and this is the Tech Travel Geeks side-by-side comparison between the OnePlus Nord N100 and the Redmi Note 9S, two smartphones currently on sale in the UK for between £150 and £200 and which deliver a lot of value for money. What we're going to do today is walk through a side-by-side comparison and see what the differences and similarities are and where you get best value for money. If you don't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube. Right then, so I recently purchased and unboxed the OnePlus Nord N100. This is a bit of a curveball from OnePlus, who have entered the affordable smartphone market, especially in that very crowded now £150 to £200 price range. For our American listeners or people internationally who better understand US dollars, that's around about 170 to 250 US dollars in terms of prices of smartphones. So these two phones both sit in that space. And the Redmi Note 9S is a phone by Xiaomi, which we unboxed, set up and reviewed earlier this year. And it's still on sale now. It's still great value for money, but offers quite a different offering compared to the OnePlus Nord N100. So let's walk through the key feature which both phones don't have. Let's say it straight up front. That's NFC. Both these phones are not usable for things like Google Pay or tap to pay and tap to access public transit. Both these phones don't have an NFC chip, so don't expect to be using them. But that's not really surprising in this price range. You can find smartphones with that feature, but then they'll have probably had to cut a corner somewhere else. Both the Redmi Note 9S and the OnePlus Nord N100 don't have that. What they do have, and is in common, is a nice big screen. And I'll just unlock both screens. You'll see that both screens in this case are nice and big. There's some big differences there though as well. So the Redmi Note 9S has the bigger, better screen. It is a 6.6 inch full high definition plus display. That means that it's 1080 by 2400 pixels in length, whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 maxes out at just HD+, so that's a 720 wide by 1600 pixels long. It's not as high resolution. Both these phones have notch or dotches, so you can see that the OnePlus Nord N100 has a dotch in the top left-hand corner of its screen, and I'll just find something with a white screen to show you what the dotch looks like on the OnePlus Nord next to the dotch on the Redmi Note 9S. So it's a centrally positioned dotch. So these two screens are nice and big. For most people, there's no big difference between the full high definition plus screen on the Redmi Note 9S as compared to the slightly smaller 6.5 inch HD Plus display on the OnePlus Nord. What the OnePlus Nord lacks in terms of resolution, and maybe in size if that's something important to you, it makes up for in refresh rate. So the OnePlus Nord N100 has a high refresh rate screen, which means things will feel faster because the screen will be refreshing more frequently. Both devices run custom versions of Android. The Redmi Note 9S is now running MIUI 12, so the latest version of MIUI, based on Android 10. And I have to say, I do quite like MIUI. It's a nice, clean operating system. It has some cool new features added to Android, which I'm sure will be picked up by Android in some future date. And I really quite like that user experience. Whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 is running Oxygen OS. This is OnePlus's own operating system or Android distribution, which is based on Android 10. The devices are both quite reactive and responsive in everyday use. I've had no issues whatsoever with them for basics like messaging, social media, taking photographs, and some light game playing. So both of them are quite capable devices. One thing to bear in mind is that they're not always the first devices on the market to get Google security patches. So we're at the beginning of December now, and you can see that the security patch that we have on the Redmi Note 9S is the October one, whereas on here, let's see if we have a bit more detail, on here on the OnePlus Nord N100 we are on the October security patch as well. So at the beginning of December, when the December security patch is about to run out to all the Pixel devices and other smartphones, these two devices are essentially a month behind. So nothing too surprising there. But one thing to bear in mind is that both these devices have plenty of storage built in. In the case of my Redmi Note 9S, this has a decent amount of storage in that it has 128 gigabytes of storage and 6 gigabytes of RAM, and that's round about £170 in the UK, whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 is a bit more frugal in that sense. It has 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage. So in terms of storing your pictures, music, videos, they're both quite capable, but the Redmi Note 9S does offer a lot more. Now, both these smartphones are running Qualcomm's Snapdragon chipset. The OnePlus Nord is running a lower end chipset, so a less powerful one. It's a Snapdragon 460 chipset, which is a 4 series one, based on an 11 nanometer transistor chipset basis, which means that it's a slightly older technology and it's a slower one. Whereas the Redmi Note 9S is running a Snapdragon 720G. That's definitely a step up in terms of processing power and graphics card and so forth. Not only that, it's an 8 nanometer chipset, which means that the transistors are smaller, it is more power efficient in the same operation. So overall, the Redmi Note 9S is a lot more powerful as a smartphone, and as well as that, offers a few extra capacities in terms of RAM, so the operating memory, and storage. But don't worry about storage too much. One key thing to bear in mind is that both these smartphones are expandable with micro SD cards. So you can pop a micro SD card in to expand the storage to not only carry your media, but to store media when you're creating it using the cameras on the devices. Now, the Redmi Note 9S has a much more capable camera setup, in my view. So in terms of cameras, on the back you have a 48 megapixel main sensor, you also have an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, and a 5 megapixel autofocus macro camera, which is better than a lot of the other macro cameras you see on smartphones. There's also a 2 megapixel depth sensor, but that's mainly for assisting in taking those portrait shots. The OnePlus Nord is much more limited in its camera department. It has a 13 megapixel main sensor, which is fine in daylight and good lighting conditions, but it then has a 2 megapixel macro camera, which is pretty much pointless. You might as well just take a close-up picture with a 13 megapixel sensor and you'll get a better shot, and then a 2 megapixel depth sensor. So the camera setup on the OnePlus Nord N100 is definitely not competitive compared to the Redmi Note 9S. Bear that in mind. The other key thing is, because the Redmi Note 9S has a faster chipset, so it has that Snapdragon 720G chip, it can record video at 4K. So if you have a nice big 4K TV, you'll be able to record video at that resolution and watch it back on your TV. whereas the less powerful chipset and the camera module in the OnePlus Nord N100 means that you'll only be able to record in full high definition or 1080. For most people that's fine, but just bear in mind that the Redmi Note 9S is much more capable at the same price point. In terms of selfie cameras, we saw them earlier in the Doches. The Redmi Note 9S has a 16 megapixel Doch camera, whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 maxes out at 8 megapixels. Both are capable of HDR, they take decent selfies, but I would say don't consider them to be competitive with super flagship smartphones. As long as you're in good lighting conditions, they'll work fine. So we've covered those things. One thing to bear in mind is both smartphones are 4G smartphones. They are not 5G smartphones, and that's not really an issue. Both of them have Bluetooth 5, so you'll be able to pair them with multiple Bluetooth devices. They both have the usual Wi-Fi and positioning systems. As we said at the beginning, both smartphones don't have NFC, so no NFC here. And on the USB side of things, both of them use USB Type-C to connect for charging, and as well as that for data. Now, in terms of charging, both devices have big chunky batteries. So they both have 5,000 milliamp hour batteries. Technically, the Redmi Note 9S is classed as a 5,020 milliamp hour battery, but that means that they're big chunky batteries that for most people will be more than a day in heavy use. Now, to charge them, both of them support fast charging, but only at 18 watts. So it's not the super fast charging that we've seen on, for example, the Vivo devices, the newer devices from Xiaomi and others. This is just 18 watt charging, which is faster than standard charging, but not super fast. And that's perfectly fine for most people. So we've talked about all the main features. In terms of ergonomics, the Redmi Note 9S is a bigger, heavier device. It has a fingerprint scanner on the side, which is sort of ideally positioned for unlocking with your thumb if you're right-handed, and it works pretty well. But it is a bigger, heavier device than the OnePlus Nord N100, which in turn has a fingerprint scanner on the back. I actually prefer fingerprint scanners on the back of the device. They are easier to access, in my view, easier to unlock the device. And this fingerprint scanner works really well, but each to their own. And when you're used to the Redmi Note 9S's side-mounted fingerprint scanner, it's perfectly fine. So I think we've covered all the main features, the differences and similarities between the two. Which one is right for you? Well, it depends what your expected usage of your smartphone is. If you're an older person like me, one of the key features that you'll want to have is a 3.5mm audio jack, which we lovingly call the Courage port here at Tech Travel Geeks. And both the OnePlus Nord N100 and the Redmi Note 9S have that. So that's a great feature that is good to see in here. The other key thing is build quality. So we've said the ergonomics are good. The Redmi Note 9S is a solid device. It really feels solid because the back is made of glass as well as the front. Whereas the OnePlus Nord N100 is plasticky. It's a plastic back, plastic frame, and the device is very lightweight. So in overall feel and overall experience, the Redmi Note 9S is better. But for the same price range, if you're not planning on doing a lot of video gaming, if you're not planning on doing a lot of camera work and editing video on your smartphone, the OnePlus Nord N100 may be the choice you'll want to go for. There are obviously the usual considerations about software. Some people do prefer the Oxygen OS over MIUI. If that's your thing, maybe the OnePlus Nord N100 is for you. But do bear in mind that that chipset, that Snapdragon chipset, is much less capable on the OnePlus Nord N100 compared to the Redmi Note 9S's Snapdragon 720G. So that's everything. From me, we've covered all the key specs and look and feel of the device side by side. They're both great smartphones. It's exciting to see so many good quality smartphones in this price range on the market at the moment. It's not all gloom and doom in 2020. So thank you for watching this side-by-side comparison between the OnePlus Nord N100 and the Redmi Note 9S. In the second half of 2020, as I said, we're in a good place if this is the offering in that price range. For now, thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the Tech Travel Geeks here on YouTube. I'll just leave you with the two devices side by side, and you can listen to some gentle jazz.